Welcome to In Your Money. I'm Bryan Hirsch. In tonight's program, we're delving into retirement and financial planning. I have two concerns relating to retirement. The first being the figures relating to the withdrawal on the two-pot system. 30 billion with 7 billion paid over to SARS. And secondly, governments encouraging individuals to take early retirement. On my radio program last week, I asked listeners to call me and explain why they had made use of the two-pot system. I was taken aback that the number of callers that I had who'd made use of the 30,000 and paid tax of amounts between 9 and 11,000, and the reasons given were ridiculous. To pay 1 month's car installment and home loan, one caller was more sensible, and they paid very little tax and paid off unsecured debt at an interest rate of 24%. And joining me this evening is Jordan Toy. Jordan, good evening to you and welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me.
Let us to talk about this two-pot system for starters. Jordan, the concept of the two-pot system. Firstly, 7 billion paid in tax. That means nearly 25% of the 30 billion. That's 2 months figure. And there's still going to be an enormous amount, the government employee pension fund, still enormous. And I've said, don't take it, and the people who can actually access the two-pot system are those in retirement and working. So someone who's working, has got a job, can put bread on the table for the family. We're not talking about unemployed. We're talking about people who are members of pension funds or have retirement annuities. I'm interested in your experience and your comments.
So certainly a lot of, as you mentioned, quite a bit of tax has been raised by SARS on these withdrawals, but the impact on the individual, I think, can't be understated. There are certain scenarios where you could say a two-pot withdrawal may make sense. I think you gave a good example there of a person paying off unsecured debt.
And had no tax liability.
Exactly.
So low earner, no tax liability.
Exactly. And I think we all know that the tax rate on two-pot withdrawals is significant, but is it a factor that actually dissuades people from making those withdrawals? I'm not so convinced. I know that that's the way that the rules around it are structured. But I think people sort of, if you're determined to make that withdrawal, you sort of solve the mental arithmetic yourself to kind of get to a justification on why you should do it. And we know from compound, the effects of compound growth, 30,000 Rand withdrawal now, the value of that money left in the account and allowed to compound over time is significantly more. I think people tend to put the blinders on and sort of focus on the near term. But again, I think the other part of the discussion is around the impact it has on the economy. So we saw in the medium-term budget policy statement that I think two-pot withdrawals, we'll see where it ends up at the end of the year, but we're not yet seeing it really translate into earnings for companies on the South African landscape. So a question of how much of it is actually being used to pay off debt, which in the personal finance context I think is reasonable, but how much is actually going back into the economy in terms of the retailers, the likes of a Truworths or any of these companies. I think that'll be interesting to see if it does play out, because I know for most of the year when we've been talking about two-pot, we've been talking about, it's going to boost consumption, and I think that's not so clear just yet. But personal finance-wise, I think it's pretty clear that most of these withdrawals don't seem to be used for the correct.
Jordan, I would advise anyone who's thinking of taking money out of the two-pot system to improve, to go to Truworths and to go to Edgar's and to go to Mr. Really forget about it. Really, you've got to get your budget right, because it's one-offs. And it gets worse going into in the next 12 months, because 2/3 of your retirement savings is going into pot 1, and 1/3 is going to withdrawal pot, which means you can withdraw every 12 months. And I did some numbers on that, and if you take 30,000 for 5 years, and you compound that, if you'd left it in the fund,
yes,
that over the 5-year period is 195,000 that you've taken. And if you take that over a 15-year period, that means over that 15 period, your retirement fund will be more than R1 million less. But I've got some other figures. Let's just talk about early retirement. Generally, early retirement is a no-no. However, government is now trying to persuade people to actually go ahead and take early retirement. And the impact, your comments on the impact of early retirement.
So just before we touch on the impact on those individuals' personal finances, I think it's well known, that I have concerns around this sort of experience we lose, in those employees, government employees taking early retirements. Are we ensuring that, the expertise that might be there, these are people who are generally going to be older or closer to retirement, are we managing the transfer of skills and experience there? I think that's the one concern I have. But on the personal finance side, for those individuals who might take early retirement, I think the impact is twofold. So, you're retiring earlier. So not only is your retirement fund potentially smaller, it's now also got to support you for a longer period of time because your life expectancy hasn't changed because you're taking early retirement. So I think that can be a really negative sort of double effect. Now your retirement account is probably worth less, and it's got to provide income for a longer period. So it can have quite dire sort of impact on each individual's retirement outcomes. And potentially that ultimately means either your funds don't last as long as you need them to, or they're going to provide less income on a monthly basis for you, neither of which is obviously a good outcome.
Well, I have done some calculations on that. I did a calculation. Someone who's earning 20,000 Rand a month, who's been in employment for 15 years, would probably have around about R1 million in their retirement fund. If they retired early, 5 years early, R1 million to support 20,000 Rands a month of income, you would need to draw 24% of that million. It wouldn't last you more than another 8 years. If you carried on for a further 5 years and carried on contributing based on your salary of 20,000, 5 years later, with inflation rates of 7%, you would need to have 28,000 Rand, but your 1 million with the growth on that 1 million plus 5 years contribution would give you nearly another R1 million, and on that 2 million Rand, you would only need to draw 16% as compared to 24%. And as Jordan made the comment, correctly so, your life expectancy doesn't change because you're retiring 5 years earlier. You're still going to have to live, and if your life expectancy, let's say, is 90 years, let's estimate from retiring at age 60, you've got 30 years. Yep. Retiring at age 55, you've got 35 years with less money. So let me make this comment. If anyone asks you, as an employer, should you be taking early retirement? It sounds wonderful. Everyone wants to take early retirement. Everyone looks forward to those golden years. You take early retirement, I can tell you, you may have golden years for the first few years, but I can assure you no golden years thereafter. So I think it's very important on that situation.
No,
and then one of the regular questions I get is, what important ingredients are there in drawing up a financial plan? So let me share with you the ingredients. I at an early stage was asked to give a talk many years ago to Multi-Rand Forum, the big broker conference. Or do they still have Multi-Rand Forum, Jordan?
I don't know if it's in the same format.
Yeah. Anyway, there must have been 1,000 people. I was down at the Wild Coast and they asked me to give them. And I explained to them as a young boy, I loved baking a chocolate cake. And I got all the ingredients from the neighbor over the road. I was 8 years old. I baked the chocolate cake and the whole thing collapsed. And I went across on the Sunday to say what happened. And she identified that 1 TS baking powder is not 1 tablespoon, but 1 teaspoon. So I learned at an early stage. So each one of you needs to have some ingredients. You need to work out, what is your plan? What is your plan for retirement? What have you done about your budget? Charles Dickens made a great comment. He says, man who lives on earns a pound and lives on 19 and sixpence is a rich man. Man who spends a guinea and earns a pound is a poor man. And for those who don't know what a guinea is, it was 1 pound and 1 shilling. So most individuals don't have an understanding. And so they ask regularly, where can I save money?
So I think there's a couple of areas you look at, right? The income and expense side. I think naturally the income side is harder to increase. Most of these people that we're going to be discussing are already working. So you can get creative on the margins to try and increase things on the income side. Obviously, there's a lot of varied routes to achieve that, but again, not easy. The expenses side is where people can take, the most or have the most impact in terms of the decisions they make. So there's 2 aspects that I'd like to look at, or I chat to my clients about, is the debt that you have, as well as your discretionary expenditure. So just to chat around debt briefly, there's 2 sort of debt repayment strategies that we often look at. One's called the snowball method and the other's called the avalanche method. And simply it's, how do you go about managing the debt that you may have? The snowball method, as the name suggests, is like a snowball rolling downhill and gathering more snow as it goes. It's about trying to pay off the highest interest rate debt first. So it might not be in Rand terms your biggest debt expenditure, but you're taking care of the debt that in cost terms or percentage terms is costing you the most.
Let me just stop there.
Yes.
I mean, we talk about unsecured debt, that's high,
yes.
But people must realize credit card debt. I mean, if you don't pay your
Very
credit
high.
card in full, anything between 19 to 22% is what you are paying on the full total of the balance at the end of the month. If you pay it half, you still pay interest from day one.
Exactly. So debt is a key point to make sure that you're managing that as best you can. Because as you correctly point out, there's a lot of excess expenditure that you can incur there if you're just managing the debt suboptimally. The other route is to say, well, we're going to target the debt that's the highest in rand terms and work on paying that off first. So that's one aspect, is have a look at your debt situation and manage that as best you can to minimize the unnecessary expenditure.
And Jordan, in my experience, I even say you may want to use your bond.
Yes.
Take money out of your bond, but not the same length of period that your bond may be, 15 or 20 years to go. Take it out of your bond and take the same amount of money that you're paying to this high interest rate debt and put it into your bond, so you pay off that debt that much quicker. So you've got to talk to the bond holders to work out how you do it. But certainly if you're paying 15, 20% worth of interest and your bond's costing you 10, but don't extend your bond don't take this money out and just extend it for a 20-year bond. That's expensive money.
No, of course. The use for that money must, I think, come from the right places, right? It shouldn't be to buy a nice new shiny car, for example. But if the question of you need debt is already there, then the next question is, well, where does it make the most sense to raise the debt from? And as you've correctly mentioned, the bond is often, because it's secured by an asset, going to cost you the least in terms of the cost of that debt. I think the other aspect one's always got to discuss when you're talking about an income and expense discussion is discretionary expenditure. You know, I think it's very pertinent now with Christmas around the corner and, you know, Black Friday and, you know, all these deals typically come around end of the month. And I think this is a key period in the year where everyone tends to sort of put the blinders on and go, you know, it's Christmas, I'm going to have a good time, but January comes around and, you know, you're borrowing from your future self to enjoy it now. So I think that's always a key discussion, is make sure your discretionary expenditure is managed correctly. And the last thing I wanted to mention is a budgeting method called the pay yourself first budget, right? So start of the month, paying everything you need to, whether it's rent and your bond, medical aid, all of those essential expenses, but then to also say, to not wait until the end of the month to say, oh, I'm going to save or invest X amount, because more often than not,
you're not going to have it.
You get to the end of the month and there's nothing left. So it's to make sure when you're paying those essential expenses at the start of the month, make sure that saving and investing, if possible, is included in that, and then you spend what's left over afterwards, or save more at the end of the month if you can.
Okay, I'm going to add one or two items on that. Stay tuned. We're going to take a short break. See you soon.